Okay, welcome everyone. This is the IDA meeting for Seneca County on October 8th of 2024. Welcome everyone. We're going to shift the agenda a little bit today because some of our members have other commitments. We're going to start with the meeting of the Economic Development Corporation. Sarah?
Steve?
Okay. Well, first item on the agenda is approval of the EDC meeting minutes from our last meeting on August 12th, 2024. Any, Jeff, any changes, corrections?
I don't have any, Steve. No.
Hearing none, motion to approve?
I motion.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next on the agenda is the Audit Committee of the Economic Development Corporation met a few weeks ago to review the engagement letter. And Sarah, if you want to just briefly, yes.
Yeah, so this is actually a slightly revised engagement letter. When we had last met, the audit fee was high. I don't remember exactly what the number was. I want to say it was just over 7,000. They've dropped it. They've dropped it to 5,850. That's the audit plus the tax returns. Not quite down to the level of the funding corp, but they said that that's sort of artificially low because of the lack of financial means in that organization. And this one has a little more involved because they do the tax returns for us. So they knocked a little bit off the price, which is nice. That's what's being proposed for next year.
Under the circumstances, I think it's, even approaching an audit fee change normally can be a challenge, and it appears they better just were able to make adjustments for us.
Okay. So the Audit Committee, which consisted with Jeff and myself, reviewed this earlier and approved it and recommended it. So, yes, do we still approve? And if so, need a motion?
Yeah, I'll motion, Steve. I'm glad to see, Sarah, you were able to negotiate that down. I think the savings, any bit of savings is good, so especially for that account. So I'm pleased to see that, and yes, I would gladly make a motion to approve.
Okay. I'll second. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay. Next is the review of the EDC long-term forecast.
Okay, so the long-term forecast for the EDC, we only do a worst-case scenario, mostly because right now we don't really know of any scenario where we realistically have revenues or anything that's adjustable. So this one, right now we have operating cash available. This was in hand as of the beginning of this year, was $132,330. We're forecasting by the end of 2024 that we'll have 117,000 and change remaining. You'll notice that because of our proposed 2025 budget, that number drops dramatically. That's in large part due to what we're proposing for office renovations. That would bring our operating cash on hand down to 17,625. This is based on a budget scenario where we receive the grant that we applied for and we move forward with the office renovation. That is seeming less and less likely by the day. So, you know, I'll follow up based on the conversations we've had as far as recommendations of what to do with the EDC moving forward and what all the options are, pros and cons. But it's likely, especially if we don't do the office renovation in any capacity, that we'll have more of a runway to give us time if we need to ramp up into something. Because as of this model, you know, 2026 is the last year that we have positive cash on hand, and then we go into the red.
Yes, and we'll look at the next at the preliminary budget, and that again is sort of contingent upon receiving any grant for modification. If there's no grant received, then I think the decision be made not to proceed with anything at this point.
Yeah, so we've got the, more or less the same budget document that you guys saw at the committee meetings. We did make the one change to do a cash budget versus the GAAP budget, which is the generally accepted accounting principles or auditing principles, accounting, right?
Yep, county.
So we've got our professional fees in here, those remain fairly consistent. Year to year, really the biggest change in this, again, is you'll see on the cash budget side, the proposed capital expense associated with a renovation. You also see the proposed revenue if we were to get the grant. But you do not see the capital expense on the GAAP budget column, because if we were to make that investment, it will become an asset that would then be depreciated. And we did factor in depreciation into this for what that renovation would be, assuming, I think, it was depreciation roughly May through December, more or less.
And that's a cash item. It's not a cash item, so it's eliminated from the schedule.
So those are the changes that have happened. Otherwise, everything else is very consistent with what the audit committee saw.
And none of this is earth-shattering news. I mean, we've known this for some time. And when is the last time this account was significantly in operation? It's been a while, hasn't it?
It's been a while. I mean, really, the EDC,
Was the last year?
most of its activity was with the cemetery.
The cemetery, right?
The last thing beyond the cemetery that had any kind of impact, but it was simply a pass-through, was the Office of Community Renewal grant that we facilitated through the county for Seneca Dairy Systems. That was
Okay.
$600,000 that passed through the EDC and went to him. So there wasn't any kind of positive revenue, but that was a line item that we saw on the financial statements. But it's been a long time.
Right. I guess my point was, this is not like it's crept up on us. It's not for certainly any misuse. It's just we haven't had any reason for this account. So just looking ahead, we're trying to do due diligence on what the best scenario, makes the most sense for this organization. Okay.
I will say one of the biggest challenges is, you know, it's hard to sort of do anything meaningful or run the organization to do anything when it has no cash and no assets to do programming with.
Right.
You know, that's a big aspect of what's
Sure.
limited us from, you know, getting creative, because there are definitely things that could be done. So we'll see. Like I said, we'll evaluate some options and get those to you.
So with that said, any other questions or comments on the budget? Hearing none, we have a motion to approve the budget and posting to Paris.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second. Kelly?
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Any other business right now?
Nope.
No. Hearing none, no need for an executive session. So need a motion to adjourn?
Make that motion.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carried.
All right, now to our IDA meeting. Jeff, you can stay as long as you're able.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, first item on the IDA agenda is the approval of the minutes of September 10th. Does anyone have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Ralph, thank you.
I'll second.
Are there any changes, modifications, adjustments to the minutes of September 10th? Hearing none. All in favor of approving those minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? We have passed, approved the minutes of September 10th. Next item on the agenda is the IDA financial statements through August.
Actually, they're through July.
Okay?
Yep. Starting off with the statement of financial position. Our total assets at the end of July measured $4,029,000. That's down $1,548,000 from our June position. And the major reasons for that is a difference in the cash position of $1,543,000, and that is due to the pilot payment that was received in June and then dispersed in July. Other significant changes in the balance sheet are notes receivable long-term. We're down $4,300 to a level of $164,000. Total fixed assets down $336, that's depreciation. And the balance at the end of July was $333,000. Other assets did not change, and again, total assets measured $4,029,000. On the liability and equity side, total current liabilities measure $152,000. That's down from $1,665,000, again due to the pilot program transfer. Labor and compliance pass-through was a net change of $685 to $2,970. No changes in net pension liability, no changes in the PIF deposits held. On the equity side, one other item was the due to other governments of $21,854. That did not change for the month of July. And our total equity was $3,855,000 compared to $3,890,000 at the end of June. That's a net change of minus $35,000 for that period. Quick review of the P&L. Total ordinary income at the end of July was $212,000 compared to $211,000 for the end of June. A minor change was $834, and the $834 was made up of RFL income of $776 and interest income of $58. Total ordinary expenses were $266,000 compared to $230,000 at the end of June. Net ordinary income was a minus $53,755 compared to a minus $18,143 at the June period. And then again, net change of $35,612. There was no items in other income, no others in other expenses, and the bottom line at the end of July was $53,755 minus compared to $18,143 at the end of June, a change of $35,612. When we look at the July 2023, the bottom line at that point was $38,000. So there's a net difference between July of '24 and July of '23 of a minus $92,601. Again, that's a quick review of the statement of financial position and the operating statement through July of 2024.
Questions for Bob? Hearing no questions? All right. I'd like a motion for the approval of the financial statements through July.
I'll move.
Any seconds?
Second.
Are there any comments, questions, additions, deletions? All in favor of accepting the financial report?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Bob, for that. Next, engagement letter of Mingle, Benton, and Bob.
So the audit committee for the IDA did review this and is recommending approval of the engagement letter to conduct our 2024 audit. Mengel, Metzger and Barr, this is the same firm that we've used in past years and that we used through the other agencies. They're proposing for our regular audit a fee of $12,875, and the single audit, which is something we're federally mandated to do for our loan program. That's $2,350 for a total of $15,225 in audit fees. Any questions?
No, That's good.
Okay. Have a motion to accept the audit, last approval of the engagement letter with MMB.
So moved.
Is there a second?
And I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We have an auditor. Ooh, good thing. All right, next, now to the material part of this here. We have a long-term forecast. Sarah, this is new, the way it's done. Very
This
interesting.
is-
I'd like everybody to give Sarah a chance to describe how, in fact, we're arriving at a long-term forecast. Because in the past, you know, out of excessive conservatism, we have said we can't, unless we can count on revenue in the future, we're not showing it, which the long-term forecast showed fairly significant losses due to the fact we don't have any commitments. It was awfully conservative. I asked Sarah to consider doing it a little differently. And the way that we discussed and I suggested is we look at the pipeline, the work that we see that Jim Armstrong does, and try to assess in each case the likely agency fee associated with a project and then the likelihood of it closing in a given year. So if a project was gonna be worth $100,000 to the IDA as an agency fee in 2026, but we felt it was only 10% likely, then in 2026, we would be showing a $10,000 forecasted agency fee. And so the idea here is that we're trying to assign some level of probability to what we know could be happening in the county when it comes to projects that are seeking our support. So that's why these numbers look a little different. The other thing that I thought we might revise in this forecast, we like to keep things as confidential as possible, but in creating a revenue forecast based on likelihood without naming the actual entities that we think are in that pipeline, we decided to try to create buckets of economic categories, and within each bucket, without naming the entity itself, we would group those forecasted revenues. So with that introduction, Sarah, I'm gonna turn this over to you.
Thank you, Bruce. So yeah, so this is the first time we've done a forecast like this, and we do still have our traditional worst case, which is the only contracted or known revenues. We can get to that second. I think the first one is probably what everybody's most interested in, and it may also be helpful to segue from this discussion into something that was attached to the briefing memo, which was a 10-year look back at what the agency fees for the organization have been, because that kind of goes along with the forecasting. So we'll start with the forecast in the first page, and what you see that's different is the first line is expected agency fees. So that is the projects that we're contracted for or have received an application and very realistically expect to be contracted for. You know, that's quite low, but that's not really surprising given everything that we've known. Essentially, that number is a combination of Scepter, which still has an annual agency fee payment through their pilot to us, and Finger Lakes Rail. Then moving on to the estimated agency fees, and this is starting only in the 2025 year. We've broken it down into 4 categories: hospitality, housing, manufacturing, and renewable energy. This is using that formula that Bruce was talking about. Just as a side note, I'll be very curious to see going forward how accurate our estimations are, because this is all based on sort of personal gut and experience, and we'll see. With this formula, 2025 is a much different picture than what we were originally showing in our budget. We could have, based on this, almost $807,000 in agency fee revenue
And
if
that-
these
and
projects
again,
close.
For the sort of the kind of transparency we're trying to get our arms around, there is a solar project hanging out there. I assume this is a solar project.
One of them is, so you'll see actually the 2025 breakdown,
That-
we've got a hospitality, manufacturing, and renewable energy. So it's, actually the other two would be bigger projects, capital-wise. Or no, they're not, but the likelihood of the renewable energy one is smaller. Obviously, given what we've seen with Trilina and how long it can take some of these projects to close, that's what reduces the likelihood of that. And why it's showing as a smaller amount on this. That agency fee would actually be significantly larger if the project came in full in 2025.
But the percentage assigned to it is 10%.
I believe so. Let me see. Yep, 10% for that one.
So what this is saying is we have prospects in the hospitality and manufacturing sector that are likely to come in next year. Part of the rationale behind forecasting this way is to make sure everyone who's involved in these in encouraging these projects and smoothing the way for them are doing everything we can to get these projects approved. And it's a matter of the extent to which the team here can work with the entity that's seeking the incentives to encourage and then make sure we actually land those projects in the coming year. So I think of it just sort of bluntly as a sales function, as much as it is an administrative function.
So you'll notice over time, those numbers change quite a bit. Obviously, the further we get out, the tougher it is to sort of predict. So the likelihoods of a lot of projects drop down significantly. But we, based on this, are estimating, project flow in every year, some more than others. You'll also notice that we've broken down rental income into two different line items. So we've always considered the Del Lago 100,000 agency fee to be rental income. 2024 was the last year for that. So you see all zeros going across the board after that. We did add a line though specifically for our office space. We
That's
have
the
not-
30,000.
That's the 30,000, so we have not, we're not banking on the fact that we might have a tenant for this coming year, but we're hopeful that the year after that, realistically, we could have someone to share the space with us. The round figure 30,000, we'll see how accurate it is. It really comes down to how much we end up sort of charging per square foot. Could be really anywhere in a range from roughly 24,000 to about 38,000. And that's gonna vary based on, $10 a square foot or closer to $15 a square foot, which all the utilities and things are included here. It's just a matter of, can we actually get somebody for that price? So we sort of split the difference there with the 30,000. County support, you'll notice we've forecasted some changes here, which obviously may or may not come to pass. We did this year put in a request for 100,000. We do not expect to get 100,000 from the county. We expect our support to stay level where it has been. But we're hopeful that we can have some additional stability through some increased county support over the next few years. That's obviously highly subject to change.
Yeah, I guess just historically, we were receiving 60,000 a
At
year
one point.
in the past, up to, I don't know, 2015 or something. It's dropped down. But,
Is that something you can get in a multi-year contract with them, rather than just year to year, so you have some forecast leverage?
I'm not sure. I would say based on
I mean,
their typical operation, I think a long-term contract would be tough to negotiate, given the county sort of looks at their budget year to year, and I know that's been an issue with the chamber
Yeah.
negotiations as well. I mean, we can try.
I
It's
mean-
definitely a good idea, I just don't know. what
You don't
it's
ask,
gonna
you
be.
don't get.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the other thing that's happening with the county is, I think at the last board meeting, the board of the new LDC, Local Development Corporation, was approved. So now the county is going to be in the economic development business alongside the IDA. And I expect there will be a greater understanding of what that entails and what is required to make it happen. I think it's been out of sight, out of mind for quite some time. We'll see. First job of that LDC is gonna be to find an executive director.
Then the other major line item you see on the operating revenue side is other operating revenues. That's more or less our interest from the CDs that we
CD
have.
interest.
So that's been very high. We anticipate interest rates going down. We did not use any kind of scientific, forward-looking formula. It was more, let's drop the estimate down, so that was set at about 45,000 a year, but obviously that'll be subject to change going forward based on how things actually end up going that direction. Operating expenditures, there's really no change overall to the totals that you see, but we did break it out into more line item detail here for you. So it's in line with the way that we do our budget and our P&L, and you can see which aspects are contributing the most to.
What's the difference in professional fees and services between 25 and 24?
So the difference is what we budgeted versus actual. There's quite a few professional fees and services that we over budget for, so we always have a $10,000 line item for engineering. We've hardly ever actually tapped into that, or like the contract with Jim Armstrong allows him to do up to $15,000 worth of work. We never hit that threshold, so there's a few things that with actuals come in lower.
It's a big jump though, from 20 to 65 or 66,000 to 166,000.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're talking about. So we had those two items have significant changes. We have budgeted past couple years for a PR line item at 5,000. That changes significantly. We haven't spent that. Jim's contract, he's usually less than half of what the total potential is there. Appraisal services, we've put a budgeted line item in case we were to have a sale or somebody interested in the industrial park. That's a few $1,000s. And then the other big savings is on legal costs, which never come in at what we're budgeted. That one we may have over budgeted for 2025. It's quite high at 15,000. I think we had originally done that because we were looking at some potentially, and we'll probably keep it, but with all the stuff going on with Willard and what the IDA's role may or may not be in a transfer process, there are likely to be some costs associated with that we've been trying to budget for, but may or may not end up coming to pass. So on the expenditure side, we are likely over forecasting. So if we look at the budget column, total, we actually, based on this model, would see an increase in cash on hand and at the end of 2025. The years following, based on our projections and estimates of agency fees, would go down, but again, that's difficult to predict that far out with some of these projects. But under this method of forecasting, we would still have positive cash on hand well beyond 2030. So that's the first long-term forecast. The second long-term forecast is the one that everybody is more used to seeing. This is the worst-case scenario, sort of sky is falling forecast.
And that shows us running out of money in 2029.
Yep.
Wouldn't like to see that happen.
Definitely not. Definitely not. This is just something for everybody to be aware of. It's essentially our cash runway, provided nothing changes. But the likelihood of that coming to pass, I would say, is very slim. So long as we're doing our jobs properly.
Any questions?
What's kind of interesting is when you're looking at both schedules,
Yeah,
the worst-case number in 2030 shows a cash availability of a minus 975 compared to a positive number of 679. That's quite a difference. And that's,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So are we somewhere between the two in reality, or what?
I mean, the folks who have done this for a long time say, it's hard to know what's coming in, but it always does. I think that's nice, that's backward looking. I don't know what the future. Again, I'm applying my own natural conservatism to it. This was very, I'd rather be conservative and B, actively pursue whatever opportunities exist and find out just how realistic they are and whether the IDA is in a position to help them close sooner rather than later. And that, I think, really comes down to knowing the principles, understanding the economic environment, and assessing whether or not they're ready to go. I mean, we have two big ones in 25. Do we really know the principles well enough to say confidently those are gonna come in?
From initial contact, say the closure, is that like a 2-year issue? Is it a?
Depends on the project.
Yeah.
Some people come to us kind of last minute, they're basically ready to go. They get their application and that's like the final thing. There's some that come to us early when they're considering their project because, they have sort of a whole package that they're looking to put together. The timeline is obviously much longer for solar projects, especially the utility scale, because of the way the permitting works. But, I'd like to think that based on the way that Bruce has had us do this and the way that we've put it together and considered projects and the likelihood of closure, I would like to think that this is conservative in some respect. But there are some projects, where it's reliant on a state grant coming through for the project to be able to get the financing and move forward. I mean, there are reasons that I would still think that those have a fairly high likelihood of closing. I mean, they're, good projects with public support and that sort of thing, but we'll see. There are some factors in these that are outside of our control. When it comes to projects, there's quite a few factors that are outside of our control. It's really a question of how accurately are we able to predict, and we'll see with time.
And in my experience, again, coming up from a sales background, when you are approaching someone who is a prospect, you have a feeling of how serious they are based on the kind of behavior you see them taking. So if you call them, they say, I'm interested, you have a first meeting, and then they ask for a bona fide proposal, well, that's a sign that they're a little more interested than if they're not asking for a proposal. If there's a principle involved and not just underling, that's even more of an indication that you've got serious interest. If they're negotiating the terms and conditions with a lawyer, well, okay, we're getting closer. So I think I would feel more comfortable with our forecast if we were applying similar kind of stages of our general process to each of these deals. And, it's a work in progress, but my level of, we've got a guy out there saying these are folks who are in the pipeline, but where really? are they in the pipeline? Are they at the, we're thinking about it, or are we negotiating with them?
And that'll depend a lot just on the project itself. I mean, there's gonna be variability.
Absolutely, there always is, but it gives, I think it gives the board a little bit more comfort that the numbers that we report on are either with a high degree of likelihood or a low degree of likelihood.
I will say the projects for 2025, the hospitality and manufacturing one specifically, we will know very early in the beginning of the year if I was accurate with the estimate that those would go through. I'm expecting applications and am very close to setting like project timeline schedules with these folks. One is contingent on a state grant that's expected to be awarded at the end of this year. That's sort of the biggest question mark is, if they get it, project is more or less a go and they're able to secure the rest of their financing. If not, that changes things considerably.
Sarah, with the consultant contract,
Yeah.
is there any, it's just a flat amount, or is it based on how many contacts the consultants have? Is there
With
any?
Jim, his is based on hours spent. And then he also gets a mileage reimbursement from us. He's sort of got his contacts that he does, every year, reaches out, which is why his is very consistent. A lot of the growth in our BRNE program is stemming from Dave and I doing additional outreach to folks, and especially the ones that we have anticipated projects with. So Jim does not actually do any of the project pipeline, really. If he thinks that someone might be expanding, he sends them to us typically, and then we take it from there.
Well, that answers my question, because I was gonna say, is there a way that we could almost incentivize more communication?
We could try, I mean, to some extent. So a lot of the projects in the quarterly report, because we have so many that we track in our pipeline, there are a lot of those that aren't even reflected in this forecast. It's things that we sort of need to be aware of. People have mentioned ideas before, but the likelihood of them ever happening, who really knows? We, for our own purposes, want to keep track of that. The ones that we've selected to be part of this forecast are what I would consider to be more concrete, or have the potential to be more concrete within the next few years.
My experience with salespeople is they can be overly optimistic and say something's gonna happen, and then it doesn't happen for some unknown reason. So it's a bit of a forensic process to figure out what in fact is real and what isn't. Anything more?
Just want to mention quickly, I don't want to spend too much time belaboring this point so we can get to the budget approval, but the 10 years of agency fees document, just for informational purposes for everybody, really. The first page is 2014 to 2019. You see, aside from 2015, which was a pretty decent project year with $313,000 in agency fees, annual agency fees were really fairly low. 71, almost 72 in the first year, but then it was, averaging around 150,000 really annually.
And that doesn't cover our costs.
And that does not anywhere near cover the costs. There were things at the time that the IDA was able to do to make other revenue, but those aren't necessarily options on the table anymore. So we very much do need to be more self-sustaining. And for the most part, we have been. If you look at the period from 2020 to 2024, there is a different picture of overall higher agency fees coming in. Obviously, a couple of years were a bit smaller. 2023 agency fee wise was a big year. That's mostly because of the timing of some projects that were approved in previous years, but overall it was, consistently much higher on average. So we're trending in the right direction in that regard.
Do we have a sense of how many IDAs in the state are operated in this manner financially? And how many are actually embedded in the county's administration in some way?
That is a great question. I do not have a sense of what the number would be. My gut says that it's a high percentage that are sort of county economic development staff that also staff at IDA. So in that sense, they're embedded, their costs are mostly defrayed through the county. We could do some digging and actually pull a list. I would say just taking the region as a sample, I think all of my colleagues are county staff.
And at one
There's been
time-
some change lately in Cayuga, so I'm not sure if that's the case there, but every other immediately adjacent county that comes to mind, there are county economic development or planning staff that also happens to run the IDA.
And at one time, wasn't the county, this county's IDA part of the county's staff?
Yes, at one time, it was county planning and economic development, I think, or the other way around, I'm not sure how it was essentially
with
titled, but Jill Henry was
Goes back to
a
Glenn
staff
Cook.
member.
It was Glenn Cook's era.
Yeah,
They were employees of the county.
yeah.
And do we know how and why the shift occurred to spin this out as an independent entity with funding of $50,000 a year, roughly? No,
No
history.
idea.
No idea, okay.
I know that at the time, I've heard that Glenn Cook was not necessarily the easiest guy to work with. We found records that sort of indicated that. I don't know if there were some personality things that sort of prompted some of that division.
There was a
and
breakdown
split.
between Glenn Cook and the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that will do it.
That did happen, so.
All right, just as a point of interest, would be nice to find out a little bit of comparable funding. Which IDAs are essentially self-funded and which are funded through the county's budget?
I
administrative
will work on pulling something together
That
for our
would be
next
good to know.
meeting.
All right, any questions for Sarah of the long-term forecast? Now we go to the budget.
Okay, so the budget is similar to the format we just presented for the EDC in that we now have two different columns for the 2025 budget. We have the proposed cash budget and we have the proposed GAAP budget. Functionally on the IDA side, there's really not much of a difference here other than you'll see depreciation in the GAAP budget. When we had been talking about the possibility of using IDA funds to do renovation, we were gonna want to include what the capital expense was as a cash item, because that would have been a significant amount of cash going out. But we also wanted to make sure we were doing something that would align with our P&L, hence the GAAP column, but that's, no more through the IDA, so I won't really go into the differences between the two columns for everybody's sake of time here. We'll briefly review the 2024 forecast. So we are, our 2024 forecast compared to our 2024 budget as far as operating revenue is expected to be significantly less. We had budgeted just over 1.5 million for 2024, but we're anticipating coming in around 418,000. That's in large part due to the Trilina project and how long it has taken that project to get over the finish line. Other major changes, we are, expecting to come in under budget on the expense side of things. Difference of about $59,000 under, again, attributed to most of the items that we've already discussed, things like Jim Armstrong's contract, engineering, some marketing stuff that we have budgeted that we haven't done, mostly to be conservative financially and also, trying to assess the merit of different expenditures at different times. The only Other big change on the 2024 columns are the expenses that we've had associated with office renovations, and that's really just on the drawing, design, and planning side of things. So we anticipate a total near the end of the year of $35,000 on that. Moving on to what's being proposed for next year. So you will see that we did take that estimated agency fee from the long-term forecast, and that is in our 2025 proposed budget. So we will be actively tracking against this when we look at budget performance over the next year. So that number, when we first presented this to the audit committee, was significantly lower. It was based on how we've always done our budget, which was the contracted revenues. So now we're trying to operate a little bit more like a actual business. So we'll see that, and we'll be able to track our budget performance against that. Otherwise, there really are no significant changes from previous years on the income side of things. You know, we're pretty consistent in terms of county support, interest income, that sort of thing. Moving on to operating expenses, again, we're pretty consistent with previous years. This does show a 3% cost of living adjustment that we've always shown on the budget for staff, but obviously that is subject to whatever the governance committee recommends and the board approves later on in the year. So I just want to note that that's something that may not end up showing like this based on what the board decides. Other than that, we aren't really proposing anything significant. The biggest change in our budgeted expenses in 2025 compared to previous years is our repairs and maintenance, and that's largely because of the cost of this building. Insurance is the other one. So those were both increased as a necessity of the move. We're not through the county insurance, or we won't be through the county insurance anymore. So we've gotten estimates, and that's where the $15,000 estimate is coming from. The repairs and maintenance side, you know, things like our utility bills. We did include a little bit of contingency maintenance in there for the building if things come up that need to be fixed that we aren't anticipating. It also includes things like, you know, landscaping and snow removal and inspections for the building and all of that sort of thing. So that's all in there. And then you'll notice that we have no proposed other income or other expenses for the IDA. At the audit committee's request, we did remove the $50,000 that we had had in the past for site development. That was originally intended to be used for consulting firm or somebody that could help us do a countywide assessment of sites for development and sort of their shovel readiness and what would need to be done to get them developed. We are still going to try to do that, but we're going to try to do that somewhat internally to the best of our ability with a few of our key sort of development areas. Those are really the major items in our 2025 proposed budget. Again, same numbers as what we showed in the long-term forecast, so this will be proposing a essentially net gain at the end of the year of $385,734 with this budget scenario.
Questions for Sarah?
Trelina, so is that factored in then to 2025's forecast? Because that was such a big part of 2024.
Technically, yes. It is one of the ones that is in, not to the full amount.
Okay.
Because the timing of that still remains so wishy-washy.
Okay.
I think I have that project estimated at like 10% likelihood of happening in the next year. And another thing of note is that a project that is in the forecast estimated in a certain year is not double counted. So because I put Trelina in the 2025 column, it is not in 2026 or anything thereafter.
Okay.
But obviously that also could change. So if a project gets pushed back for some reason, you know, we'll see these changes on a year-to-year basis coming across the forecast, but just so everybody knows, we did not double count projects. So if it was 10% in 2025, it's not 20% in 2026.
No, so essentially it's put in the entire budget as 10% of really ever happening versus, you know, it's, well, if it's 10% this year, it's probably maybe 50% next year, but
Yeah,
a little bit more conservative.
so that's the budget.
Looks good.
Questions for Sarah? A motion to accept the budget.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Well, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Oops, a roll call here, sorry. Kelly?
Mr. Brusso,
Yes.
Mr. Brownell,
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
Mr. Lot,
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie, Mr. Kime, and Mr. Kircher, absent, motion carried.
Jeff, you're on.
Yeah, I'll be brief. A couple of things. One, we had a really great tour of the chamber and brought some, I know Sarah came, David came down to Miranda Cheese new production facility. What an amazing facility that is, Tom, so thank you for hosting us there. Also, on a Chamber of Commerce side, obviously we are very involved in tourism promotion as the tourism promotion agency. We are actively working on bringing the State Hospitality Association representative down to talk about the short-term rental law that sits awaiting Governor Hochul's signature. So we hope to get more information for our community, both any rental owners that may exist in our community, as well as municipal representatives, to learn more about the impacts and ramifications of the short-term rental law. So those are two quick updates from the chamber.
Questions for Jeff? Anything? Thanks, Jeff. Ernie, what's going on at the Board of Supervisors?
Well, I think you've seen stuff on the papers, that's waste management's a big thing right now. Sacramento's with our new report they got, and of course the lakes. Clean water, that type of thing, so.
So an email went out to the Board of Supervisors from the supervisor in the town of Lodi. I think there might be some, I think there's some errors in that.
I don't doubt it,
So,
both sides.
so that will not go away. Any questions for Ernie? All right, thank you.
On trout today.
You are Don Trout. You don't look like Don Trout.
Oh, that's because this was a template from an old meeting. Sorry
Oh,
about
oops,
that.
Sorry about that.
We know you're not Don. Okay, thank you. And then Sarah, your report.
Okay, so we've already talked about a lot of these items, so I'm really gonna keep the quarterly report sort of limited to where we are in terms of our business retention and expansion program performance, which does obviously somewhat correlate to our project pipeline and to the estimated agency fees and things that we've discussed, as a lot of those expansion projects are stemmed from the visits that we make to businesses. So at the beginning of the year, we always set out what our year-end goal is gonna be. Our year-end goal for this year in terms of BRME is 65 visits. To date, we've done 57, which is just a little bit above where we were last year. And last year, we exceeded our goal. We had 70 visits last year. So we're on track for about that same progress. Obviously, the project flow this year is still slow. We do not anticipate, having sort of meeting our year-end goal of 5 final resolutions for projects passed. Interest rates are starting to come down. We're starting to see some of the projects that we've been kind of waiting on, ready to hopefully start moving forward. And that's obviously reflected in the long-term forecast that we showed everybody. Just as a refresher for everybody, the projects that we have done this year, received applications for, we've fully approved the Groggery project at this point. We have an application, or did receive a preliminary application, I guess you could say, from Savion Energy, which had done a presentation last year to the IDA board. They want to wait for official consideration until they're a little bit further along with their permitting with the state, which is fine by me, because hopefully we'll have some more certainty of when that project will actually close if they kind of wait to officially move ahead with us until then. And then the other one is Finger Lakes Rail, which actually we have a meeting with some of the other IDA directors to talk about potential pilot terms tomorrow. So we should be getting you all hopefully updates on when What that might look like and when those public hearings will be, we are gonna have to hold 5 public hearings for the Finger Lakes Rail project, one in each town that's impacted. Which we're, provided we can come to terms with the other directors and come to terms with the company, we're gonna aim to have those done at the end of October, beginning of November, to potentially do a November project approval for Finger Lakes Rail, and at the very latest, a December approval. We've got 34 projects that we're tracking in our pipeline, but again, not all of those were reflected in the long-term forecast. Some are very early stage, just sort of ideas that we wanna, make sure we're checking back in with, company owners on. And then the other major thing in this quarterly report is really what to expect looking toward the end of this year. So, as most of you know, Steve and Tom Keim are both gonna be stepping down from the board at the end of this year, so we have a few positions to fill on our board. We are gonna be doing interviews tomorrow, and then we expect, if everything goes to plan, that it'll go before the Board of Supervisors, Economic Development, Tourism and Housing Committee at their next committee night, which would be October 22nd, and then goes to their full board for approval by November 12th. The goal would be to have the new board members attend the December meeting, not as voting members officially until January, but just to sort of get the lay of the land and see how we do things here. We've been working on some housekeeping around this building, getting the space next door. We're working on trying to get that cleared out so we can actually get it cleaned up, take some photos of it, and really start marketing it for potential tenants. And then the other thing is, we continue to work with the Willard Task Force and the county on moving redevelopment efforts there ahead. And that's sort of what's on our agenda, high level, for the end of this year.
Questions for Sarah? No questions? Thank you, Sarah. Other business?
Nope.
Nothing to report? No need for an executive session? And in light of that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Don't cut the live stream, Dave. We have to do the funding corp still.
I'm on it.
Got it.
Thank you.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you, everyone. And the funding corp members, who I think are Steve, you, and I,
Yeah,
and Bob.
yeah.
The rest of you may
You're
be
free to
excused.
stay, free to leave, whichever you like.
Because this will be exciting, so I don't know if you want to.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, welcome to the Seneca County Funding Corporation meeting for today. First item on the agenda is review and approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting on August 20th, 24.
I move approval.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next item is, I haven't found with the other meetings, we've also went out and contacted MMB. So Sarah?
So the engagement letter, the proposed audit amount for our 2024 audit is a fee not to exceed $2,750, and then an additional $700 for the work related to our Paris reporting schedules.
And the audit committee met earlier and approved that and recommended that for full approval by the board. which is essentially the same as the committee.
I move approval.
A second?
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Next is the presentation and approval of the Funding Corp 2025 budget.
So this is gonna be very simple. We're really proposing no revenues other than interest. Although this is a new line item, I will say, mostly because we did take some of the Funding Corp assets and put them into a CD. So we are getting some interest revenue now. Obviously, it's not enough to break even in this organization, but it helps stem the bleeding a little bit. So we're estimating about $1,500 in interest because of that CD. On the expense side, total audit fee of $34.50. We always put in legal costs of $1,000 there, just in case anything comes up. And then 500 special fees and payments and 500 miscellaneous, would be total expense of $54.50 with a negative net income of $3,878.
And how much did we put into the CD?
30,000.
Okay.
Okay, and as usual, the proposed budget expenses are higher, or at least budgeted higher than typically what we've had.
So it's a conservative.
So it's a little bit, yeah, more conservative. Yes, any questions or comments on this?
I move we accept the budget.
I'll second.
Okay, Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Kernan?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Any other business?
No?
No.
Well, no need for an executive session, so can I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion